The Keep on the Borderlands is the most iconic starting adventure in Dungeons & Dragons history. I love kicking off new campaigns with this one every chance I get, and we'll talk about why it's still a great option for referees today. Now, this will be a review. There will be some minor spoilers, and then towards the end of the video, I'll include some notes on how to launch an ongoing campaign from this adventure, and I'll include some conversion thoughts for ShadowDark. First, I'm John. Welcome to my channel. I'm an old-time referee. My goal here is to give people practical advice on how to be better OSR referees. So thanks for checking out my channel. So why do we care about Keep on the Borderlands? Well, it was part of the Moldvay Basic box set. That made it the adventure that sold more copies of any Dungeons & Dragons adventure in history. It was written by Gary Gygax himself, the co-developer of the game. So it's a direct transmission of his thoughts on how to run Dungeons & Dragons and how to structure a sandbox adventure. And for me, there's this allure of the historical places in Dungeons & Dragons, the legendary places that have been around since the 1970s, 1980s. The Caves of Chaos is one of them. It could be stepping foot on the Isle of Dread, conquering the Tomb of Horrors, holding up the skull of Asararek, the Demilich. Maybe it's defeating the Fire Giant King in his hall or visiting the Vault of the Drow. And these classic adventures give you the opportunity, either as a referee or as a player, of joining the fellowship of gamers who have been visiting these iconic places for 50 years. And we're in this golden age of availability where Wizards of the Coast, at least for now, has made all of these classic adventures available on Drive-Thru RPG for, $5 a PDF. This is really cheap entertainment. Keep on the Borderlands specifically, it embodies all sorts of cardinal virtues of sandbox gameplay. Things like expedition planning and resource planning, information gathering on the part of the players, and giving them the ability to balance the level of risk and reward. So it's a great embodiment of old school style play. And listen, adventure writing has improved from the perspective of, okay, we use graphic design programs now, and our presentations and layouts have improved. Usability at the table and brevity is a thing. But these classic 1970s, 1980s Dungeons & Dragons adventures have timeless gameplay and timeless ideas in them. All right, let's switch to a screen view where you can see what I'm seeing, and we'll start taking a look at Keep on the Borderlands. Right on the cover, you see this is considered a special instructional module, and that's true. The first 5 or 6 pages will include all this advice for new dungeon masters. I'm not going to dive into those here. I was really impressed reading it again on how much good advice Gary Gygax packs into just a couple pages. I just think I could spend the whole video just talking about his game mastering advice. But this is probably worth picking up just for a couple pages of Gary talking about how to be a better referee. The first section of the module is about the castle, the Keep on the Borderlands itself. So the Keep is this military outpost on the far edge of a kingdom before the uncivilized areas, before the Borderlands. It's a military installation, but the outer part of the castle, called the Outer Bailey, is a small frontier village. And so it provides a social opportunity for the players. There are all the things they could need, like tavern, an inn, places to buy things, people to get quests from, a few interesting NPCs to run into. And there's a social game that can get developed there as the players explore the area in and around the keep. They start to come to the notice of some of the NPCs there. They could get given small missions or quests and eventually come to the attention of the military lord of the keep the Castellan and be given maybe a more serious quest or mission. So that pillar of the game is well represented by the keep and how you can use it. Oh, one quick note though, depending on your point of view, this is either a feature or a bug. No one in the keep is named. Gary had this perspective that people would want to localize modules to their campaign settings. And so they would want to name everyone according to, well, what was the fashion in their particular world. So at the end of this, or actually down in the description below, I'm going to include some conversion notes, including the naming tables I use in the Keep on the Borderlands. All right, the next section of the module is it does include a small wilderness. You can see the keep here is here on the left. The Caves of Chaos, which is the main adventuring site in this adventure, are about 3 miles away. And then scattered across the small wilderness are a few adventuring locations. From my perspective, players typically focus on the caves, and the wilderness shows up as maybe people in the castle ask them to go do specific things. Perhaps someone sees bandits on the road, and so a captain of the guard asks if the players would scout and look for the bandit camp, that kind of stuff. The main focus, though, tends to be on the Caves of Chaos, so let's switch over and take a look at that one. All right, let me go find that map. Here we go. So the caves are a ravine. You can see it's about 500 feet long, and then there's a fairly steep grade going up the slopes, and there's cave entrances dotted all over the ravine. There's about a dozen cave entrances. If you think about a classic dungeon, you have level 1, level 2, level 3, and the dungeon gets more dangerous the deeper you go. Gary has taken that vertical construct and tilted it on its side so that the caves get more dangerous the deeper into the ravine you go. In fact, one of the pieces of advice early on is either have an old timer or maybe a roomer, especially if your players are brand new to this style of gameplay, kind of warn them that the deeper you go into the ravine, the more dangerous it's going to be. One of the things I always emphasize when people first enter the Caves of Chaos area is how wrong or evil or oppressive the atmosphere is. There's something in the ravine that's drawing all these monsters together. Monsters that don't get along with each other, that don't work together typically, have all chosen to pack themselves into this small area because they're being drawn in by a supernatural influence like moths to a flame. And that's the capstone adventure, which we'll talk about in a minute, at the far end of the ravine. But for the most part, most of the caves are populated by humanoids, these small tribal groups. They don't necessarily get along, so there's opportunities for faction play. As an OSR type referee, you'll be able to use your reaction rolls, your morale checks. Not everything has to be combat, and the players will get to interact with a lot of different humanoid groups as they explore the caves. Things like kobolds and goblins and orcs, and kind of like those tried and true low-level monsters that have appeared in adventures for the past 50 years. Now, OSR gameplay challenges, or let me say it this way. OSR gameplay strives to challenge the players, not necessarily the characters. Things like puzzles and riddles, there's not going to be any ability score on your character sheet where you just say, oh, I want to roll and solve the riddle. The players at the table are all going to have to put their heads together and figure it out. There's tactical challenges that do that. Things like resource planning and expedition planning challenge the players. And sometimes there are social and ethical problems, and the Caves of Chaos presents one of these. The monsters are evil. The players will be running into prisoners in many of these caves, people that are being tortured, humans. It'll be a common experience for someone to be like, oh, thank heavens you showed up. They were going to eat me tonight. But after the players have defeated all the warriors in a particular cave system, there will be non-combatants left behind. It could be females, it could be young. There's nothing in the rule book to tell you how to deal with that situation. That's going to be something that your players are going to have to talk about. They'll have to consult their alignment. They will have to decide, well, what's appropriate for our campaign or for our campaign world. It's an interesting way to challenge the players, no doubt. There are these classic gotchas that have come down through history in Dungeons & Dragons. Things like the confusing area where the players lose their way and they're stalked by a minotaur, or the sarcophagus that you push it open when an undead pops up and starts attacking everybody. The reason those things are classic is because they first appeared in an adventure and now they've been copied for years and years. And this is that adventure where those kind of things show up. There's even a comely woman at one point who, of course, when she turns around, she's got snakes for her hairs, and surprise, it's a Medusa. So there's some really interesting encounters in this one. And then I mentioned the capstone adventure at the end of the caves is the Shrine of Evil Chaos. Totally different in tone and flavor from the rest of the caves. There are evil priests and clerics worshiping some dark power. And it's all described in what I call this wonderful High Gygaxian language. So how do we update this for modern gamers? The first thing I do is I create more urgency and immediacy in the plot hook that gets the players to the Keep on the Borderlands. So I always think of this as a place where the status quo has changed recently. You've got this frontier fortress. I frequently place it in a campaign setting called the Grand Duchy of Karameikos. So the Keep on the Borderlands appears in the mountains, and there's a well-traveled mountain pass through dangerous areas before you reach another kingdom. And all of a sudden, merchants can't make it through the pass. Caravans are being destroyed by monster raids. Something has changed that has these different monsters coming together and working together. And that, of course, is the Shrine of Evil Chaos rearing its head again. So typically what I do is a call goes out saying adventurers wanted. And so there is this sense of urgency and immediacy for adventurers to go explore the caves of chaos and try to figure out why all these different monsters are there, why they're working together. One idea I saw, I think it was Professor Dungeon Master, actually suggested starting your first adventure right at the caves. So if you're with new players, game session number 1 puts them right into the action. And then when they're ready to retreat and rest and go buy stuff, then they can retreat to the keep and start working on the social side of the game. Now, one thing you may ask, isn't the keep a military fort, and isn't it just 3 miles away? Yeah, if you look at the map of the keep, there are ballista and catapults and all these siege type weapons on the different towers. I tend to play the keep as being there to defend against invading armies or to protect the lowlands from big monsters, things that you would need a catapult or a ballista against, like giants or dragons and the really big monsters that might live in the mountains, and that the soldiers in the keep are not well suited to go into dark holes with torches where they might be killed and eaten by monsters. Furthermore, I typically play this, like I said, in the Grand Duchy of Karameikos. There's trouble brewing on the western frontier of the duchy. The Castellan will typically say, well, he had to send a company of troops out to support the frontier, and so the keep is also not at full strength. Again, creating the reason why adventurers are needed. Down in the conversion document, I've got sample name tables. I provide some guidance on how to up-level some of the monsters. For the most part, you can play every monster in the Caves of Chaos as is, straight out of the ShadowDark book. There are a few cases where there might be an orc chieftain or a bodyguard to the chieftain that's more powerful than the regular orcs, and it's very simple to up-level them and make them a little bit more dangerous. For treasure, old school adventurers gave out a lot of treasure divide it by 10 for ShadowDark. So if the players find an art object worth 455 gold pieces, you'd make it 45 or 46 gold pieces. A lot of the monsters have pocket change with them. I don't mess with that. It is what it is. I've provided conversion notes for a couple magic items that didn't exist in ShadowDark. That's easy. One thing about experience points. The Keep on the Borderlands is designed to get a party from level 1 to level 3 by the end of it. As I added up the ShadowDark experience, ShadowDark players could easily hit level 4. There's a lot of magic items in this one, and because ShadowDark characters get 3 experience points every time a treasure find has a major magic item, your group will power level. One thing I suggest doing is knocking down the experience points for simple +1 magic items down to 2 experience points. And that'll scale the leveling just enough so that the players won't power through the levels and be too powerful to finish the adventure. The last thing, I'm going to bring up a map of the Grand Duchy of Karameikos and talk a little bit about how I use the Keep on the Borderlands to launch an ongoing campaign. So first, across the mountains from where the keep is, it's quite a distance, but there's eventually a desert land to the north and to the east. Back in the day, that would be a good place to put another starting adventure before the Lost City. Right in the vicinity of the keep itself, on the wilderness map, was a place marked the Cave of the Unknown. Back in the day, there was an adventure called B1 In Search of the Unknown, and many referees connected those two and put B1 as their own Cave of the Unknown. If you have a favorite dungeon, you could put that there. I could imagine seeing something like the Citadel of the Scarlet Minotaur, for instance, being where the Cave of the Unknown is. In the 1980s, there's this tremendously underrated adventure called B10, Night's Dark Terror. Now, it is tightly integrated into the storyline of Karameikos. So it's very difficult to just pick up and put into any different campaign setting. But if you're already using the Grand Duchy of Karameikos, B10, Night's Dark Terror is a fantastic adventure as a follow-up to the Caves of Chaos. B10 is for character levels 2 to 5. And so if your players are level 3, as they finish the Caves of Chaos, they're right in the sweet spot. And the last one is X1, the Isle of Dread, another one of those legendary places that if you're doing a world tour of great Dungeons & Dragons adventures, you've got to step on the shore of the Isle of Dread at least once in your life. The Isle of Dread kicks off when the players come into possession of a treasure map and an account that talks about how to get to the Isle. You could easily put that treasure map, if you don't want to put it in the caves, you could have it in the possession of the Castellan or some other character at the keep who gives it to the players for services rendered. And that would have your players traveling south through the duchy to the capital city, where they're either going to buy a ship or hire a ship and set sail for the Isle of Dread. A fantastic way to follow up the Keep on the Borderlands is to have the Castellan write a letter of commendation for the players to the Duke. It gives the players a reason to travel to the capital city. The Duke in the Grand Duchy frequently will award minor noble titles like Court Lord to adventurers who have done some service to the realm. And this is another way to tie the successes of your player characters into the social fabric of your campaign setting. Hope you found this review interesting, if not stimulating, and at least triggered some ideas on how you can take a very simple adventure module and then build out a whole campaign or launch a whole campaign just from running a single adventure. If you missed it, I did a video on how to convert TSR adventures to ShadowDark, and I included different discussions in there that would be helpful for this one, especially there's a bit on ogres, and an ogre does appear early in the keep on the Borderlands. Otherwise, thanks for hanging in there, and I'll see you guys next time.